Welcome to Speak Out, Stand Out by Green Communications, where we're learning how to help our kids become better communicators. We believe our voices are the strongest asset we have, and our mission is to empower the next generation to use their voices to make a difference in the world around them. Whether you are a parent, an educator, or are just invested in today's youth, we hope this podcast will help you build confidence in our future, one voice at a time. Welcome back to Speak Out, Stand Out. I'm Elizabeth Green, and today's guest is Jessyka Coulter. Jessyka is the CEO and founder of Ace Cookie Tutoring. Jessyka, welcome. We're so glad to have you here. And tell us, what is Ace Cookie Tutoring and a little bit about you?
Definitely. Well, I'm glad to be here, Elizabeth. So thank you so much. I'm excited to talk to our audience of parents because that's exactly who I work with. One-on-one is the mamas of teens. So that means middle school, high school, college kiddos to me. And I teach their teens how to learn. So things like homework, things like study skills, things like, just the struggles with school. I help with all of that because it always comes down to, does your child actually know how to learn? And most of the time, the answer is no. But I know we'll dive into that together.
Yeah, this is such an interesting concept to me because personally in my household, we do have struggles over homework and school and things like that. So I'm, from a personal level, very excited to hear about this, but also just the idea of not knowing how to learn is a very foreign concept to me. I don't think I've ever heard that before. So I am really eager to learn more about this. So Jessyka, let's just dive in and start with that. So we don't just naturally know how to learn.
It's one of those things where we're curious for a while, when we're younger in elementary school, where, we always ask the question, why? I can think of every single parent listening is probably going, yes. How many times did I hear that question, up to the age, I don't know, probably at least 5 or 6, maybe a little beyond that. And then all of a sudden it stops. It just, our kids are no longer curious to learn. They feel like it's a chore. It's something they don't enjoy anymore. And honestly, it gets to the point where I had a parent tell me natural ability runs out. And I was like, I really like that description because it gets to the point where we just know some things. It just comes easily to us. Everybody probably has a certain subject, certain class they just liked because it was easy. Or maybe they thought it was easy because it was interesting. And those to me are two different things. It can be, easy, but you don't like it. But you can also be willing to put the effort in just because you do find it interesting. So to me, as students enter middle school, that's when these study skills become must-haves. Once they realize, things are getting a little tougher than they were the last couple years, maybe last several years. And I guess the short answer, Elizabeth, would have been, do we know how to learn? No, because we're never taught how to learn. And how can we really enjoy anything or know how to do anything until we're actually taught it?
Yeah. And so when you, just kind of an offshoot question, when you work with kids, do you see kind of a commonality through all children or based on the type of school that they go to? Because there's so many options now, right? With homeschooling, world schooling, public school, private school, charter schools, all the things, right? Is it a commonality across all platforms? Do you see this? Or
for sure. Yeah. It doesn't matter. No, it doesn't matter the type of schooling. It just literally comes down to, has a student ever been taught these skills? And when we have parents, when I talk to parents, they're like, well, he's getting straight A's or, we're not having any of these problems. He's just bored. To me, no matter the grades, no matter the level of interest, it does always come back to, are these skills in place? These are the foundation. And if parents haven't seen problems yet, or maybe they're only seeing rough spots here and there, to me, it just means we're kind of waiting for the bomb to go off. To me, it's just kind of like, it's just a ticking time clock. It's just eventually that brick wall is going to happen. Eventually that speed bump is going to be, impossible to get over unless our teens actually have the 12 study skills that I teach.
Okay. All right. And then before we dive into some of those skills, how does this relate to communications?
That's a good question, right? That's what we're here to talk about. So to me, I think first of soft skills, because that's one of the study skills I teach, and communication is most definitely a soft skill. And again, it's not something our kids really get a chance to learn, because the example I always give when I'm teaching teens when it comes to soft skills and communication is group projects. That's pretty much the only time they truly have to practice communication, let alone, when talking to mom and dad, let alone talking to teachers. But at the same time, for a parent standpoint with communication, I'm thinking every one of our listeners probably has had to say more than once in their life, have you done your homework? Are you ready for that test tomorrow? Have you packed this? Have you done that? And so to me, that piece right there of parents having to nag, parents having to remind, parents kind of having to be that accountability piece until teens can learn otherwise, that to me can cause a big problem in communication, because what parent really wants to do that instead of just going to be mom or dad and have fun and do, family things that aren't related to tutor things.
Yes. Oh, that you're speaking exactly to me right now. Regular conversations in my house. So, all right. Well, I am excited to learn what you offer and how we can help our kiddos. So I know we probably don't have time to go through all 12 things that you teach, but what can you give us some that we can start implementing at home today with our kids?
Definitely. So the number one study skill that I teach, the first one that I always recommend, is note taking. And that is simply for the fact that it's the skill that applies to all of the other skills. So, actually, being in class, the teacher's teaching, and taking notes, that's the obvious example. But the less obvious examples are, grocery lists and, writing things on calendars. Those to me are also notes, but, our listeners probably aren't going, a grocery list is a note. Literally anything that you write down, anything that you record or that your teen records, that's a note right there. So the first thing I really like to do to even start the process of, how do I teach these study skills? I encourage all teens to know their learning style. Are they visual? Are they auditory? Are they kinesthetic? And I have an assessment that I love to share. It's really quick. It's really easy. And any of our listeners can Google, learning style assessment. But, I know when we get to my freebie, that's part of that is because once we know how our teens learn, then we got to figure out how can we tie in homework into everything, or how do we tie in their learning styles into everything, homework, learning, school. So that would be kind of one of those action steps right away.
Okay, so we learn what type of learner they are and start tying things in. But aren't we a little bit limited to that? Because let's say they're a visual learner and their homework is to listen to a podcast, right? We don't have that much control over it, do we? If our children are not homeschooled where we're dictating the assignments?
And that's a really good point. And that's part of the whole reason I'm such a believer in, so, kind of pushing the study skills, is because of the fact that our kids have to know how to adapt. That exact scenario right there, being assigned something to read or something to listen to, and that's not what our child wants to do. Yeah, what do? Most of our teens aren't going to say, hey, mom, I'd rather read this, or, tell the teacher, hey, can, you give me an audio version of this instead? Most of our teens just brush it off. We see them as being lazy. We see them as being, bored or, not trying, when really they need it a different way. So the simple answer to that, I'm in the same boat. I hate listening to audiobooks. I don't like them. And so I would be the student, when I encourage my students to do, is ask the teacher for what it is that they want. It's never guaranteed, not at all. But at the same time, if the teacher has a transcript, or maybe a transcript, especially on the computers nowadays, it's easy to figure that setting out, no matter the program, no matter the website. But our teens have to, A, want to do it, and B, realize that's what's going to work for them.
Gotcha. Okay. And so back to note taking, there is an art to note taking, right?
Yes, there is.
So can we dive a little bit more into that? Like if I tell my son, okay, you're supposed to be, reading this chapter about World War II, right? And take notes on it.
Yeah.
What does that mean? How do I tell him to do it in a way that is effective for him? And why is note taking effective?
Oh, there's some really good questions right there, Elizabeth. So I'm glad we're diving into this. I'm getting to nerd out here. So the why for the notes to me is pretty simple. That kind of comes down to a couple things. Number one is that our teens, and none of us, can possibly remember everything. Like we don't. Someone told me not too long ago, we forget 70% of the things that we learn or that we're told within like 3 days of being told it. Yeah, I couldn't believe that. I'm like, seriously, 70%? But it makes sense. How can we possibly, everything we do all day, every day, let alone, our kids at school. And so for me, the notes, that's our way of remembering everything, because if we don't have something written down, something recorded, something drawn, something to refer back to, then how can we possibly remember what we need to know 2 weeks from now on that quiz, or, 3 months from now on that final? So that's, to me, reason number one And then reason number 2 is it makes homework so much easier. And because you sit down to do homework and your child's like, I don't know, well, that's a perfect opportunity for them to test their notes. Your son reads that chapter and then, you ask him a couple questions, or maybe he's got a homework assignment to do on it. Well, don't go back and reread that possibly 20, 30, 100-page chapter. Look at your notes that are, if done correctly, maybe 2 or 3 pages long. And if you've got what you need, you should hopefully be able to do most, if not all, of that assignment.
All right. Gotcha. And do you have any tips for teaching them how to, know what to write down if they're not working off a study guide or something like that? How do we know what to take notes about?
Definitely. Yeah. I realize it's I don't think I answered your whole question.
No, you're good.
So I teach teens 7 note-taking rules. And so I don't know if I can really share all of them just for the sake of time, but the first is literally not to write everything down. Because so many students I work with, the very first thing we do when we teach note-taking is I have them kind of take a little pretest. I have them read, like you said, a chapter, and then just write whatever they think is important. And almost every single time I work with a student, no matter if they're middle school, high school, or college kiddos, that's what's fascinating to me is it doesn't matter the age, I still see the same type of notes. But they almost always do not use bullets. They don't use any type of indentation, any symbols or anything. And they almost always write in complete sentences. So to me, those are 2 big, what? Why is this happening? But if no one's ever told them, hey, you should write bullets and hey, condense this, write this as short as you can, but get the gist, of course they think they have to write complete sentences.
Yes, I would have never thought of this before. It's just because that's the way we teach them to write, right? They're taught to write in complete sentences. So I think, in fact, now that you're saying that, I'm remembering back in college where I went to school to be a news reporter and learning how to take notes from an interview and bullet points and how important that was. And I don't think I was ever quite taught that before. So that's really interesting. That's great. And it's so much easier on them once they start doing, once they know.
Exactly. And then they also, something I teach a lot of teens, especially as we're kind of getting closer to the start of school, is the fact that when they have new teachers, they don't know if the teacher is going to talk a lot. They don't know if the teacher is going to write a lot of things on the board. They don't know if they're going to have access to the PowerPoints after class. And so my whole goal is that students learn, okay, does this teacher's talk? And it's just kind of extra stuff that, is fun, but isn't necessary to, succeed in the class. Or is everything written on the board going to be something you're tested on, something that you're expected to know, 3 years from now with, that level of math, in high school. And so that's something else, is learning not everything said, not everything written, not every, like you mentioned, study guide or any resource handed out will necessarily be expected to be understood, but you still have to pick out the important details from each.
Right. Okay. All right. Great. All right. So note-taking is one thing we can do to help our kids. What's another one?
So a question I get a lot, it seems like a pain point, that's a frustration, would be organization and time management. Those are 2 big skills that I think every single teen needs. And I don't know if I've ever met a student that really has a system that works. I don't know about your kids, Elizabeth, but most students I work with, they do not like to use planners. And I don't get it. To me, that was my lifeline in middle school, high school, and college. And I'm how would I have possibly known what to work on, let alone when to work on something if I hadn't written it down?
Right. Just like we were saying earlier before we hit record, that we both would have missed this today had we not had reminders on our calendars, right? And I'm taking notes as we speak and writing things down. So and yes, this is absolutely a source of contention in my household with my now high schooler, not understanding the purpose of a planner and just flat out thinking they don't need it when they do. So how do we convince them? We know that they need it. We know it's going to help them. How do we express that to them so that they want to use their planner?
So it comes down to me, again, getting that buy-in, getting that interest. And to me, it always goes back to those learning styles. Because for me as a visual learner, I had to have it written down because I needed something to refer back to. And I was the person that broke out the colors, the different colors for homework versus tests. That's what worked for me, and that's what works for a lot of visual learners. But our auditory learners, I have a student I worked with who absolutely hated to write things in the planner. And I'm okay, had to kind of figure out why. But then we found an app, I think it was called Reminders or something, and she loved it. And so what we had her do is at the end of every day, as soon as she got home from school, she needed to kind of basically leave herself a verbal voice memo of, this is what I need to do. Now, the thing that I caution on that is possibly, could she really remember every class, especially if she had like 8 classes? So it's kind of finding that fine line between what's enough written down, but that's not too much that, someone like an auditory learner doesn't want to do. So what we ended up doing, our kind of happy medium, using the planner and using the app, was for her to bare a minimum write down at the end of each class, yes, homework, no homework in her planner. And so that was up to her to remember when she got home, what were the details. And so it was kind of, she had to make that effort, but the goal was being an auditory learner, seeing that written cue, she'd hopefully hear the teacher's voice in her head. She'd hopefully said it to herself and the teacher, pointed on the board, whatever, so she'd remember.
And did you see an improvement with that, with her organization skills as a result of that?
Oh, without a doubt. My biggest concern was the fact, an app, and on her phone, so we had to have that, very kind of discussion. I had to be straight up with her. It's like, okay, if we put you on your phone, you have to decide, can you look at the reminders app, listen to that kind of voice memo and then be done, or is it going to be distraction? And so we talked about timers, and then we talked about, there's all these different other apps you can use that kind of block access to other things during certain times. And so we really did have to figure out what worked for her. Now, my kinesthetic kiddos, they like to be hands-on. So, writing is hands-on technically, but what I've learned, a lot of kinesthetic, tactile, whatever you want to call them, they really, really like sticky notes. And so what I've learned works well for them is, instead of putting things in a planner, like individual items, I encourage them to write those again on a sticky note, put that in a planner, put it in a folder, whatever. And then at home, I encourage them to kind of sort them out. These are must do today. These are, next week. These are, so again, they have the sticky notes, so they're physically moving them, and then they love ripping them up. They love that sense of satisfaction of, I did that assignment, the sticky note's gone, and like they just literally, get to feel the sensation.
Yes. Oh, I could see my son really liking that.
Yeah.
I'm a check box checker, right? Like I get that sensation when I check a box that I've done something. I can see him really liking the sticky note idea. All right. These are great. Keep them coming. What else can we do?
So, the big thing with organization that I want to make sure our parents understand is that we've got the mental organization and the physical. And so the physical, being the stuff, making sure that those backpacks, the computers and the chargers, and all the assignments, all whatevers, get back and forth from school. And that just kind of comes down to, what's the current problem? Is it that we're spending 10 minutes every morning getting everything into the backpack, and that's causing us to be, 10 minutes late out the door every morning? Or is it a matter of everything's in the backpack, but then, my son or daughter is not handing out the assignment to the teacher, even though it's done? To me, those are two very different organization problems.
Yeah. And so I'm glad you touched on that too, because again, I keep using my son as a reference here, but that's been a big issue with us, him having the assignments done, but not actually turning them in, which is hard for me as a parent because I'm not there to physically remind him. And so that's been a struggle with us. So do you have any tips on helping them like lock and load and get that last step done?
Definitely. That's a perfect example, because my favorite school supply are these plastic folders, the ones with the brads in them. And those are my answer to that question every single time. The fact that if an assignment's, paper, this works best, obviously, but if there's one homework folder that all homework that's completed, that needs to be done, goes in, then what I encourage students to do, and this kind of, again, comes down to the teacher, but either at the beginning of every class or at the end of class, that folder needs to be checked. No matter if we remember there's an assignment that needs to be turned in, or if we don't, we're checking this folder every single class, every single day, because if there's something to be turned in, it's going to be in that folder.
Okay, that makes sense. And can you elaborate a little bit more on, I know in once again, my instance, but sorry, you're just like speaking directly to me and I'm like super excited about everything we're talking about. But my son does have ADD. And so that definitely feeds into a lack of organization. But at what stage should we know that our kids should be able to do these things, or start to suspect that maybe there is an underlying issue like ADD or something along those lines that we didn't previously realize?
So what I would tell you is that middle school is the perfect time to learn these study skills. I think I might have said that already, but to me, as soon as you have a 7th grader, then these study skills need to start being implemented. And it's one of those things that if we're seeing, homework not turned in, we're even not knowing what homework needs to be done. I mean, any type of communication, that isn't what we want to have happening coming down to school, there's something going on. Is it the fact that, is it executive functioning, like getting things turned in, getting things started, or is it kind of that crossover with the study skills that we just don't know how to do what we need to get done?
Right.
And so to me, with ADD, ADHD, that just makes things worse. Again, I know you're learning a lot from me. I learned a lot from some experts at my last event. And I was told that ADHD, ADD, they're literally like their brains are different, and they're literally like 2 or 3 years behind their peers that are neurotypical. So it's not that, again, they don't want to, that they can't. It's just that, they already don't know what to do, and then they really don't know what to do because their brains are just behind.
Yeah. And for anybody listening that might be dealing with things like this, I will say it was extremely frustrating for me as a parent to not understand. You did the work. Why would you not turn it in? Right. And then finally realizing, like you just said, their brains are different. It's not that he didn't want to turn it in. It's just that his brain didn't tell him to, like mine would have, right? Because it's just a challenge that they face. So opening up our minds and eyes to know not just they learn differently, but obviously a lot of children have different learning disabilities and challenges, and working with those too. Do you have, on that vein, I know that, do you have any tips specifically for parents of neurodivergent learners that might appeal or be more applicable even to them than just your average Joe student?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because I do get that question a lot of, how do you do things differently with neurodivergent learners? And the thing is that's so awesome about study skills is that every single one of these skills, every single person needs. Doesn't matter if you have a learning difference or not. So to me, that's kind of tip number one, is just the fact that these skills are important to everyone. To me, study skills are life skills. Now, the big thing I will point out is most of the time, my experience that are ADHD kids are ADD kids. So this is making me think, it's even more accurate based on what you said about your son and the sticky notes, is most of the time those kiddos are very tactile. They're very hands-on. So, we immediately think of like the fidgeting and the needing to move, but then they also, sometimes just, they don't want to have things read to them. They don't want to be told to sit and read. They just want to get their hands, their feet, their movement. Mm-hmm. But I've also learned that kids, especially with dyslexia, they're much more likely to be auditory learners, because if they can't, read, or they've struggled so long to read, they've had to learn, how do I listen to get what I need? Because if I have to look at it myself, not going to go well.
Right. Yes. Audiobooks are a huge, huge hit in my house for that exact reason. Yeah. So, and it's amazing too, if that's the way you learn. My son listens to audiobooks all the time and he could quote them, whereas if he had to read it, it would be a different story. So that's great. So Jessyka, when it comes to communication with our kids and they're home from school, they're tired, they've been at school all day, they have homework they have to do, it just has to get done.
Yeah.
What are your tips on how do we avoid the argument over it and make it a more positive experience, as positive as homework can
be? Part of this, Elizabeth, really comes down to trusting your team. It comes down to acknowledging them, especially, parents like you that have a new high schooler, trusting the fact that, you can't do everything. If you keep doing everything, the reminding, the, talking to the teachers, the this, the that, you're really holding your own son back. Unfortunately, it stinks to let him fail. It stinks to, see him, not do as well as he could, but it comes down to what's he going to do about it, So to me, that's kind of tip number one, is really being willing to take the step back. But at the same time, if these skills are missing, then by taking a step back, he's going to have to learn how to compensate. But how can we possibly compensate or figure out how to take care of ourselves if we've never been taught how to do it in the first place?
Yeah. This is excellent. Well, before we run out of time, do you mind to share one more tip for us too that we can start implementing? Because like I said, these are fantastic. You're blowing my mind. You're making my day. So do you mind to share another one with us?
Sure. So the other big question I get a lot is, why is my teen so distracted? Why is my teen so, not able to focus on homework versus the phone? And it really just comes down to, especially with phones, that even if they're off, even if they're in airplane mode, if they are in the room with your child when he or she is trying to do homework or studying, it is a distraction. So that's something else I really want parents to do sooner rather than later, is figure out that homework area of the home, that study area that is only going to be used for that. And so it can't have, the TV, the consoles, the whatever is a distraction. And again, to me, that goes back to those learning styles, because for me, I love my colored pens, I love my highlighters, but someone who's auditory doesn't need those things and is probably going to be, drawing things, creating things instead of using his or her ears. Whereas our kinesthetic kiddos, you try to put them in a small little tight space and they can't wiggle, they're going to go insane and not do anything they need to do because they need to get up and move and walk and whatever it is hands-on they need to do.
Do you ever find that it is helpful to have, I don't want to say distractions, but to have background noise? Do you ever find that that's helpful for the TV to be on the background? I know for me personally, it's a massive distraction, but for some people, is it ever helpful, or is it pretty much solid no?
I generally say no, that, I'm very anti-music, anti-TV, but the thing that I've been fascinated by is, for especially our auditory learners, they're the ones most likely to be distracted by like someone walking by or if there's people talking, because they are able to listen so well that they're immediately drawn to, what's going on over there. But the thing I've been fascinated by is I had one particular student that she, I can't even remember the movie, but there was a movie she'd watched, she said like 100 times on Netflix. And I'm like, okay, you must love this movie. But the thing that I really, really liked and that we found was a good timing for her is that she knew the movie so well. She knew as soon as she heard this line or this particular music or this particular part, she knew, oh, it's been 10 minutes, or, oh, the movie, it's this 2-hour movie is almost done. And so we were able to kind of incorporate that into her study sessions and her homework, because she knew, okay, if I don't have this thing done by the time I hear this, I've wasted 10 minutes. Or, I only have 30 minutes to get this done because that's when this part of the movie happens. And so instead of having to set a timer and again, possibly letting her get distracted by the phone, she kind of used that video as her timer. So for me, it's generally a no. But for that situation, once she I didn't believe her at first, I'll be honest, but once I really was able to ask some questions and verify some things, because I'm like, I'm just curious, is she really this good? And it's like, oh, okay. Because she's like, yeah, I don't even care about the movie anymore. I'm just listening, but not
It's
really.
just kind of comfort noise at that
Exactly,
point. Yeah. Yeah. So one last question. You mentioned a timer. Do you suggest timers for homework? And also, what about like a gap in after school time? Is it better just to stay in that mind frame and get the homework done right away, have a break, come back to it? Are there any like rules of thumb that work for most people across the board? And I know it's situational, but what do you see?
Definitely. So for me, I love timers because they're motivational. So the kind of purpose of the timer and like kind of the impact on the student, it's just going to depend, on that particular teen. I mean, some students love to beat the clock. So, if they know, I have 10 minutes, can I possibly get it done in 5? And then they just love that feeling, like kind of like, haha, I did it. But then the cool thing is if they set 10 minutes to get it done in 5 minutes, the way I see it is you now have 5 minutes to do whatever you want. And so that's where the motivation comes in. If they want to get going on the next thing and then all of a sudden they have 20 minutes at the end because they're done with all the homework and they saved all that time, or they know, okay, until the timer goes off, I can do, whatever on my phone, I can go get something to eat, whatever. But the other question about kind of what to do from home, coming home, and then homework, to me, that, again, is personal preference. I mean, I was that nerd, I was the valedictorian, the straight A student. And so I was the person sad when there wasn't homework to do. Like, what do you mean I have to find something to do for 2 days of this weekend? I'm like, what is this? But, that's who I was. But I mean, I know not a lot of students are like that. There are some. So I'm always excited when I get to be like, yes, I understand you. But, there are some teens that, they need an hour break. They need 30 minutes, but it comes down to really figuring out that schedule. And, some students like to say, well, I'm just tired, or, no, I'm not ready. And that's when those limits have to be put in place. When those kind of motivation systems have to be put in place. And we really have to figure out, okay, well, this is the hour you've committed to. If you're going to do it, great. Otherwise, what are the consequences of you not doing it? Because that's something else that sometimes we try to help our teens kind of get over the mistakes. but at the same time, it's like, this is the hour you said you were going to do it. You do it, great. You don't do it, it's on you, but if you can't come with us to do this thing this weekend, or, this thing you knew we were going to do later tonight, again, your choice.
I really like what you said too about the time that they committed to do it, because you're putting it in their hands to say, I need a break after school and I'm going to do it at this time, and giving them choice, which is so important. But then, of course, when that time comes, okay, this is what you said. Mm-hmm. So that's a really great tip too. But Jessyka, this was enormously helpful. And obviously you have followed up your homework love with the perfect career for you. I love it. That is fantastic. And I have taken some notes during this that are I'm going to be talking about with my kids this evening. But if people want to learn more from you, and you have a freebie and you do coaching, like or virtual coaching, right? Exactly. Tell us more about that and where people can learn more. Cause I know there's a lot of people like, tell me all 12. I need all 12 tips.
So my company is called Ace Cookie Tutoring. And so that's the website too. So acecookie-tutoring.com. My program called Love to Learn Study Skills, Love to Learn Study Skills program. So there's a 3-month version, 6-month program. And I talk about all the details with parents when we meet one-on-one for free consultation. So for any of our listeners that are curious, okay, what are those 12? How exactly does this apply to my own kid? Definitely recommend going to the website, scheduling that free call. And then the homework buster, like you mentioned, I think of it as 5 tips to bust through your teens' homework objections. So definitely some of the things that we talked about today, but really just kind of give you an idea of what's going through my teen's brain, what is he saying? Why is he saying it? And then, how do we get over that? What are those study skills that apply to that particular objection, let alone kind of like we said today, what are some things that we could do right away that would stop this from happening?
Oh, that's great. I am going to download that right away. That, like I said, that's needed in my house. Well, you have been tremendously helpful to me, and I'm sure many other people. So again, so excited to have you here. I've learned a lot and so much appreciate your time and all of your help, because like you said, these are lifelong skills that we all need to know and we need to learn in some way, shape, or form. So you've definitely helped out for sure.
Great.
If you are looking for more ways to build communication skills in your kids, grab our free mini lesson on how to craft a polished and professional speech out of thin air, along with 52 fun prompts so your kids can practice every single week. You can find that along with info about our upcoming public speaking and debate courses for kids at greencommunicationsedu.com.